The last set of HTML tags that we are going to see is HTML forms. So what is HTML form? A HTML form is used to collect user input. Now say for example you have designed a website where or if during admission you would have filled the application form for our college, okay, online application form. So in an application form is actually a HTML form which is used to collect user input. So where the form will have a text box, it will have a label, and then it has a text box, and then it will have a check box, it will have some radio buttons, it will have some drop down list. So these are all some of the user input controls, okay, some controls wherein the user can give their inputs. So the data is collected through a HTML page, and then it is sent back to the server, and from server some information is got, the data gets stored in the server, and the user gets a response. Let's say the form is successfully submitted or something, some message. So this is for this the basic thing that you require is a HTML form. So this is how, let us see how to design a HTML form to collect user input. So here an example is given. So on top you see first name colon. So this first name is actually the label, and then here you have a box. So this is where you accept text. So this is an example of a single line text box. Last name is again a label, and then there is another text box to collect the last name, and here you have a button. So this button is actually a clickable button. So when you click on, you can move your mouse on top of it, and you can, when you press this, when you click the mouse button, some action takes place, okay. So these are all some of the controls. So I told you label, so first name, last name, these two are called labels, and these two boxes are called as text boxes where you get single line inputs, and then here this is called a button, okay. So where when you press this button some action takes place. So these are some of the controls. So let us see how these controls can be put on a web page. So the basic the basic tag is HTML form. Form element is used to create an HTML form for user input. So form is a basic tag. So this form can be used inside your body tag. So form, and then inside you open and close the form tag, and inside that you can have any number of form elements. Okay, so a form element is a container for different types of input elements such as text fields, check boxes, radio buttons, submit buttons, etc. Okay, so all these will be so we are going to see the each and every input field in detail. So the input element, after the form element, next comes the input element. So the input HTML input element is the most used form element. So inside your input, different types of input element are there. So what are they? So if you want to have a single line text input field, then you say input type equal to. Type is the attribute that is used for defining the different types of controls. So you say input tag, inside the input tag you say type equal to text for a single line text input field. When you say type input type equal to radio, displays a radio button. A radio button is a very small circle like a button, wherein you can, out of many options given, you can choose any one option. Let's say for example you want to select the gender or the sex. The gender will be actually female or male. So you'll have to choose any one of these. So this option will be given using what is called a option button or a radio button. A radio button is, the radio button control is used whenever you want to choose a single option among multiple options. Next is checkbox, input type equal to checkbox. Now a checkbox is when you want to choose more than one option. Let's say suppose you want to select the hobbies. A person will have more than one hobby. Let's say singing, dancing, browsing through the net, reading stories. So let's list out some of the hobbies like this. So a person may have more than one hobby. So if you want to give that, you want to capture the hobby of a person or the hobbies of a person, then you will have to give different hobbies, a list of hobbies, and then in the form of a checkbox. And then so the user can choose more than one option. And input type equal to submit. Submit is, I told you, it's a button. So wherein when you design a form for collecting user input, what actually happens is the user enters the form and then he presses the submit button. So when you press the submit button, what happens is the data that the user feeds into the web page is collected and it is transferred to the backend or the server, and then from where the website is hosted. Okay, so and then the data gets collected and stored in the server, and from there again it responds to the user with a message, say the data is submitted, or there is some error in you have forgotten to fill a particular data, something. So it will respond, it will come back to you, throw some message on the user. So the submit button helps to go back, do this transaction, collect the data, go back to the server, store it, and then take the message from the server and respond it to the user. So for that purpose we make use of this submit. So submit is a special type of button. So it's called a submit button. So other than that, you can have a normal button, okay, which is called, so input type equal to button, which is a normal button. So it's a clickable button. So now a normal button without being clickable, it is of no use. So a button has to be a clickable button, so that when you click on that, it will trigger some action will take place. Okay, so all these things. So initially beginning at, I told you, you can develop a static HTML web page using HTML. So even now we are going to design only a static page which contains some form controls. But how to make it dynamic, how to make the web page dynamic in the sense how to make it interactable, so that you can enter some data, and when you click on the submit button, it goes back and then comes back to you. So like that, a communication, how to make it communicable. So that you need programming incorporated into this HTML. So that aspect we are not going to see in this course. So we will be seeing the scripting or programming in next year. So now we will just be designing some we will just learn how to design a static web page with some input elements or controls like this. Okay, so these are some of the types that you can have. You can have a text, you can have a radio button, you can have a checkbox, you can have submit button, and you can have a normal clickable button. Some of the inputs. Now first is text fields. So text field is, you can just say input type equal to text. Okay, so before that we will see we have designed, here we saw an example, this is an example. So let us see how to give this example, how to give the controls. Okay, how to give the control. So this is how you will have to give. This is the coding for that particular example. So you start with a form tag, and then this is a part of the program. So before this, you will have this form is inside the body tag, as I told you. So okay, let me show the full example. So full HTML will be like this. So you will have doc type HTML, and then HTML body. Then you don't need head, because inside you are not going to give anything inside the head tag. So directly we can start off with a body tag. inside the body tag, let us say, give some title, give some heading, text input fields in H2 H2 tag, and then start of this form tag. So you have form, under that, okay, the first one is label. So I told you the first name. இந்த மாதிரி ஒரு டெக்ஸ்ட் பாக்ஸ்க்கு பக்கத்தில் இந்த டெக்ஸ்ட் பாக்ஸ் என்னது, what is it the user has to type inside this text box, that has to be, so for that you will have to give some you will have to give something, some name like first name, last name, give your date of birth, give something. இல்லைன்னா வெறும் டெக்ஸ்ட் பாக்ஸஸாக இருந்தால் எந்த இடத்துல என்ன டைப் பண்ணணும்னு we will not know. So because of that you need some labeling, give some name, give some information regarding what the user has to type in that particular text box. So that is called a label. So a label is, now how do we give the label? You open a label tag, label, and then for is an attribute. So you will have to give, there are in a web page there will be so many labels. So you will have to now say this particular label is associated with the text box that you are going to define next. Okay, so you will have to associate the labels with the text boxes. Okay, so how, not necessarily with the text boxes, even with the check boxes or radio buttons or whatever it is. So you will have to now here in this example the label has to be associated with the text box. So the first label is associated with the first text box. Now how do we associate it? Now if you look at the text box, the input type equal to text, we have after input type equal to text, type is one attribute where the value for that attribute is text, and then you have two more, okay, two important attributes, one is id and the other one is name. Okay, so what is this id? Id is, there in a particular web page there will be so many text boxes, there will be so many text boxes. So how to identify? So in a class there are so many students, so each one is given there, we don't each student has got a roll number and also a name associated. So we don't use the name because there will be some 2-3 students will have the same name, so we may not be using the name, but we will be giving the roll number to uniquely identify the student. So here also for each and every control we will give, to identify that control we will give a id. So id equal to, here you can give anything, here it is given f name, it is a name given by the user, so f name. Then name equal to f name. So what is this name? I told you when the user enters, actually in a dynamic web page, when the user enters the data and presses the submit button, the data, that is, see, in an ordinary in a C program, when you give a C or Python or whatever language, that C++, whatever language you have already studied in your +2, so if you want to store some data you need a variable. Okay, so let's say you want to write a program, a very simple program to add two numbers. Okay, so you will accept the two numbers in two variables, let's say a and b, and then you will add the two variables, values in the two variables, and store it in another variable c. So basically you need some variables. So here this name acts something like your variable. Okay, so the value that the user enters in the text box, that will be returned to the server through this name, So here let's say the person enters John, so this John, the f name will contain this value John. Okay, in the server the data that is entered in this text box will be captured using this name of the name of this text box. So that is the purpose of the name. Now without this name you cannot actually enter any data, and the data will not be submitted to the server. So you need this name attribute. And what is the purpose of this id? The id attribute is to uniquely identify the particular control. So here now for label you will have to associate this label for the first text box, for the name attribute of the first text box. So whatever you have given, name equal to fname, here you should give label for equal to fname. So you are defining a label for the control whose name is fname. That is the meaning of this. So label for equal to fname, and then you can give whatever it is. So here the content is first name. Whatever label you want to be displayed here, that you will give here. Close the label and you give a break, because if you don't give a break, what will happen? If you don't give a break, what will happen? You will get you'll get something like this. You will get the text box by the side of the label itself. That is all. So if you want it one below the other, then you will have to give a break. So after the label you give the text. So for the text box, you will have to say input type equal to text, id is equal to fname. You see that the id and the name both have the same value. You can give the same name. So id equal to fname and name equal to fname, value equal to John. When you give some value here, now if you don't give a value here, what will happen? Nothing will happen, because see, if you run this, so you will see an empty text box. So mostly for name and all, data will not, default name will not be displayed, because so this is how you will have to give the label and the input type equal to text associated with the label. Okay, so we will see the next. So you will see that it displays like this. The next is label. Label, we have actually seen label. I explained it to you. So the label has got the attribute for, and for attribute of the label should be equal to the oh sorry, did I tell you name? It's not name, it should be equal to the id attribute of the input element. So the for attribute of the label tag should be equal to the, not the name attribute, it should be equal to the id attribute of the input element to bind them together. Okay, so I'm sorry. So earlier I think I told you label is associated with the name, but label is not associated with the name. The for attribute of the label is associated with the id of the input type equal to text. Okay, input type, whatever it is. It may be text, it may be radio button. So you will see them later. Now, see radio buttons. Radio buttons I told you, you will have to select, the user can select one of a limited number of choices. You will have to give, let's say, if you look at the example, so you have, you can select any one of this, see, any one of this. You cannot choose more than one option. So that is radio button. So how will you give that? You can give input type equal to radio, and then similar to the text. So just like how we gave the id and name for the type equal to text, so you will have to give input type equal to radio, id equal to male, name equal to gender, and value equal to male. Now here you will have to give the value. Say here the radio buttons are just the empty buttons, but whatever text that is displayed by the side of the radio button is actually the labels. Okay, the label associated with the radio button. Veru radio button na enna aguna, veru oru kutti circle matram irukum. So but adu vandu, so you need a label associated with that button. But now when you click on this radio button, what is the value that has to, I told you in the previously that all these controls, whenever the user clicks on any of the choices, the value that the user has chosen, that has to be returned to the server. So if you click on this, what is the value that it has to return? That has to be given here. So value equal to male. So in a text box, when you say value equal to some name, it means that that is the default value. That value will be displayed on the text box when you run the HTML code in a browser. But here for a radio button, value equal to male means when the user clicks on this radio button, this is the value that will be returned to the server. So the radio button in general is given as input type equal to radio, ID equal to male, name equal to gender, and the value male will be returned in the name attribute. So the server will capture the input through this gender, through the name of the through the name attribute, and the value that will be stored in gender will be male if the user selects this particular radio button. So like that, and then the as I told you, just a radio button alone is not sufficient. You, for every button there has to be some label. So label for equal to male. So the for attribute has to be associated with the ID of the input type. So for equal to the ID is male, so male, and then what is the text that has to be displayed? It's male, so close the label and give a break. Okay, so the next radio button is input type equal to radio, ID equal to female, name equal to gender. So name will be the same because it is a radio button, and whatever, each one is not a separate radio button. It is, you know, the whole thing. If you say sex or gender, the options under the gender, these are all the options. Okay, so the whole the set of radio buttons will be given the same name. So name equal to gender, value equal to female. Similarly, input type equal to radio, ID equal to other, name equal to gender, value equal to other. So for each radio button, a label will also be associated with the radio button.